Hey there, maniacs and viewers. You're watching the Main Man channel. It's not just a name, it's a way of life. You got to improvise, adapt, and overcome each and every day just to make it in this cruel old world. Appreciate y'all watching. Please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Anyway, you may be watching me on the Main Man channel, which is my variety channel, or you may be watching me on Buford Pusser, Hero Criminal, or In Between channel. Whichever one you're watching on, welcome. We're getting into Chapter 2 of W.R. Morris's first book about Buford Pusser, the 12th of August. This chapter is titled, I Don't Want to Go to School. I don't find a whole lot wrong with this chapter. I think it's pretty accurate. It really skims over Buford's early childhood life and everything from birth to early teens. And like I say, I don't see a whole lot wrong with this chapter or anything like that. They might have exaggerated a few things or cut a few things out, but it chronicles his childhood and his upbringing pretty good, and they were poor. Carl was a sharecropper, and he worked at a sawmill some, and he did a lot of odd jobs. And eventually, he started working construction for a piping company and different things, and he did whatever he could to make ends meet. Buford was really close to his mother. Sometimes maybe she coddled him a little too much, but even she admits that. But it is what it is. It chronicles their close relationship when he was a kid. And all right, so let's just go with it. We're going to have to break it up into a couple parts because this chapter is huge. But let's go with it. Chapter 2, page 8. I don't want to go to school. It was December 12th, 1937, in Finker, Tennessee. Daisy Garner, a small woman in her early 30s, stood beside the bed where Helen Pusser had just given birth to her third child. Outside, the temperature was well below zero, and funnels of dry snow swirled across the yard and whipped the front of the three-room frame house inside. It was warm, almost too warm, Daisy thought, staring into the fireplace where flames licked noisily at two huge logs. She turned and studied Helen's face, tired but calm after the ordeal. Where on earth is the doctor, she thought. It seemed forever since Carl had burst into the house to ask her to stay with Helen while he walked to the closest telephone to call the doctor. What a night for this to happen. So at these 3 stars here at the end of each of these sections, I'm going to go ahead and give a little recap and give my thoughts and everything. We don't get winters like that anymore. Not around here, not that much. I don't know, times is different or what, or maybe they were actually exaggerating how bad the weather was that day, or maybe it was that bad. Who knows? I wasn't alive back then, so I don't know. Okay. Carl Pusser is a big man with muscles as hard as marble. Plodded through the knee-deep snow. He had made the 5-mile trip to the Bowers house without two. Chapter 2, page 9. Too much trouble. Thank God they'd been home, so he could phone Doc Tucker. The miracle was that the doctor had been home. For a second, Carl forgot how tired he was and wondered if Tucker had made it to Helen in time. I've got to hurry, he mumbled. Straight ahead, he saw the outline of the Plunk farm. If he could borrow a car, he could get back to Helen in a matter of minutes. Everyone was sound asleep, he realized, and as he walked up the snowy path that twisted through the backyard, but there was another miracle. Plunk's old Ford was parked right beside the back porch. Now, if the damn thing would just start, which he doubted, most of his worries would be over. The first problem was the car door, frozen shut. He yanked at it until the sweat rolled down his face and froze. Finally, the door came loose, and so suddenly that he lost his footing and sat down hard in the drifting snow. He got up and fumbled in his shirt pocket and found one kitchen match, which he cautiously struck on the tin dashboard. In the brief and sputtering light, he saw a key dangling from the ignition. The cold leather seat cracked as he slid into the car. He sat peering through the windshield into the darkness, almost afraid to turn the key. Hell, he thought, if it won't start, it won't start. But I've got to try. He turned on the ignition and he pushed the starter. There was no sound but a low growl. "Come on, damn it," he grumbled under his breath. After 3 more tries and such pumping, much pumping, the engine suddenly came alive. Sounds like a tractor that hasn't been used in 6 months, he thought, but at least it started, and he leaned back in the seat with a sigh of relief. All right, so your neighbors just don't leave their keys in the ignition for you to borrow their vehicle while they're asleep anymore. It was a different time back in 1937, so that's crazy how much different things are different. We going on almost it's 2027. We're going almost 90 years since that happened, folks. That's a long time ago. Anyway, almost a century. All right, let's finish this page. Dr. N.A. Tucker, a husky man with thick, dark brown hair, flung open the door of the Pusser house like a sheriff armed with a search warrant. The 12th of August, chapter 2, page 10. Daisy, gently rocking the latest Pusser edition in her arms, looked up in fright. "Well, I see Mother Nature beat me here," Tucker said. He laughed, tossing his well-worn medical bag on the foot of the bed while he got out of his overcoat. When Daisy was finally able to catch her breath, she said, "You scared the living daylights out of me." "Sorry," he said, "but I was afraid I wouldn't make it in time, and I didn't." He grinned, picked up his bag, and quickly examined Mrs. Pusser and the baby. Both of them seemed to be in fine shape. "I'd better be careful, Daisy, or you'll take my job away from me," he joked, taking a needle from his bag and giving Helen Pusser a sedative. Daisy laughed weakly. "I don't think you need to worry about that," she said. "I sure wouldn't want to have to do the job very often." "Nothing to it," the doctor said, sidestepping. A clutter of damp, washed clothes, blood-stained towels, and pans of warm water on the bare wooden floor. "Carl not back yet?" "No, I'm a little worried. I wish he'd get here. Helen will be asking about him before much longer." Daisy glanced at the bed where Helen was half buried in a sagging feather mattress, her thin body barely visible. "Don't worry about Carl. That big strapping son of a gun will make it all right. Baby got a name yet?" "Buford Hayes," she said. Helen said if it was a boy that is what she wanted him named. "Buford Hayes Pusser," the doctor said. "That sounds like a good name. Sure won't be hard to remember." "What's that?" Daisy turned. "Must be Carl." The door flew open and Carl Pusser burst into the room. "Is Helen all right, Doc?" "Yep." 12th of August, chapter 2, page 11. "Yep, she's doing fine. So is the youngster." Carl glanced at his sleeping wife, then took the baby from Daisy, pulling back the faded blue blanket to see young Buford's face. "Boy, he's a Jim dandy, ain't he? He's nearly big enough right now to hold a mule in a cotton row." Tucker grinned. "Yeah, Carl, almost. He's a big fella, all right. I weighed him on the portable scales. Over 9 pounds. Carl handed the baby back to Daisy. "He doesn't know it, but I went through hell for him tonight," Carl said. "I had to walk 5 miles to call you, and steal a car to get back here." "Whose car did you borrow?" Tucker asked. "Prince Plunk's Ford. I was damn lucky to find the keys in it. I was even luckier that it'd start. No telling how long it had been sitting there. I'll drive it over there after a while, and he can bring me home." Tucker sighed all of a sudden. "I'm dead tired," he said. "Guess I'll get home. That's a fine boy you've got there, Carl, and Helen's doing all right, too. Guess she's a bit tired, though." He got up and took another brief look at Helen and picked up his medical bag. "Didn't leave anything, did I?" He looked quietly around the room and moved toward the door. "Thanks a lot for coming out tonight, Doc. For the time being, you'll just have to settle for things. With cotton selling so bad, it's been hard as hell making ends meet. It's been a tough year for farmers, Carl smiled. It ain't been too good for doctors either. I'll check on Helen and the boy again tomorrow. Good night. Night, Doc. Thanks again. Carl watched the doctor get into the car and then closed the door. Daisy, he said, it's been a hell of a night, ain't it? Daisy, holding Buford, was sound asleep in the rocking chair. Okay, that's the end of another section. So we'll talk about a few things real quick. Well, Carl was a sharecropper back then. And so he was evidently farming cotton. And what really kept the family fed, he was pretty good at running moonshine too. Pretty good at making a little shine. And I'm sure he may have been back then. He may not have been back then. It may have been later on in life that he did. But a lot of the people who were farmers back then, if it wasn't for moonshine, they didn't get to eat. They couldn't afford to even have food. As times was rough back then. It's 1937. That's almost 90 years ago. Also, since that was Prince Plunk's Ford car that he borrowed, that shows the relationship, the long relationship the Plunks and the Pussers had, and I believe they was kin too a little bit. And that might go towards Buford and Petey's relationship later on in life. Petey was one of Buford's deputies, and Petey was intensely loyal to Buford. He was a yes man when it came to Buford, and he did whatever Buford said. Anyway, that being said, we'll move on to page 12. 12th of August, chapter 2, page 12. Although it was 1937, West Tennessee was still feeling the pinch of the Depression. There were still block lines at the government commodity stations. Cotton was selling for 5 cents a pound, and regular jobs were few and far in between. Like most of the West Tennessee families, the Pussers were struggling for survival. There was no money for staples or seed or clothing. Bills went unpaid. The only thing that wasn't scarce was food. Helen Pusser spent the summer canning everything from vegetables to preserves. There were always plenty of potatoes, eggs, meat, lard, sugar, flour, coffee, and salt were plentiful, however. Coffee and salt were not plentiful, however. Carl tried to persuade himself that things were bound to get better, but he found it hard to accept his own philosophy. Roosevelt, who had been elected to the second term in 1936, was trying to remedy the economic problems through large expenditures of public money and creation of jobs. But in 1937, Roosevelt's plan had not been very effective in West Tennessee. There was still a great deal of unemployment, and Carl, a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, took some pleasure in telling everyone that the Democrats hadn't done any better than the Republicans had. We'd have had a depression no matter who was in the White House, he said often. It was just one of those things. Times were bad, but Carl was among the fortunate. When he wasn't farming, he had a job at Albert Plunk's sawmill. He worked 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, and the pay was 50 cents a day. On Sundays, he was a self-made barber. On a typical weekend, he would have 30 or 35 customers at 5 cents a head. Shortly after Buford was born, however, Carl thought about giving up the barbering. He was worn out with the long hours at the sawmill and the chores at home. But the thought of the approaching Christmas season. Okay, 12th of August, chapter 2, page 13. We're going to take one word from page 12, or this won't make sense. Christmas season changed his mind. There would have to be some kind of Christmas for Helen and the kids. Even though times were hard, Buford, of course, would be no problem. He was too little to know what Christmas was all about. But the older children would be disappointed. He would need every dime he could earn. So he kept plodding through the days, tired, more asleep than awake most of the time. Christmas had came and went, with apples and oranges and candy, Helen's cakes and pies, and the annual supply of whiskey. Although Carl drank very little, every Christmas he and some of his neighbors went together and ordered gallon jugs from a distillery in Cairo, Illinois. One man was designated to make the 200-mile trip and bring back the whiskey. So it was bootleg whiskey. Which, I mean, I ain't got no issue with it around the holidays, whatever they want to do. The gaiety of the season dispersed the gloom for a little while. But then it was back to business of trying to make a living. Winter faded gradually, and the valley shook with the hum of logs passing through the sawmill. Spring was coming, crop time. But for Carl, who had neither the seed for spring planting nor the money to buy any, it was a period of constant worry. One day he slammed the corn crib door shut and stalked in the house. Trapped again, he thought, just like the damned varmint. He went into the house, brushed roughly past Helen, and flung himself into a kitchen chair. It's pretty damn bad when a man works day and night and still doesn't have enough money to buy a seed, he complained. Helen opened the oven door and inspected the pan of cornbread. Carl, all that cussing, yelling, ain't gonna help matters any. The best thing to do is to go to Selmer and borrow money from the seed and loan office. Why don't you just face it? Carl, still sulking in his chair, took a bag of tobacco from his pocket of his worn overalls, shook some into a 12th of August, chapter 2, page 14. Cigarette paper. Jerked the sack strings close with his teeth and crammed the sack back into his pocket. Borrow, borrow. That's all a poor man does all his damn life, he muttered. Everything a poor son of a bitch bakes belongs to the other bastard before he even gets his hands on it. He licked the rolled cigarette, put it in his mouth, and lit it. Like I said, Carl, the language ain't going to buy any seed. In spite of the argument with his wife, Carl decided that there was nothing to do but follow her advice. He went to Selmer the next day and borrowed $75 from the seed and loan office, agreeing to buy fertilizer to plant the crops. Although this was part of the government requirement, Carl didn't agree with it and didn't mince any words in saying so. It was the same damn thing year after year, Carl thought. Borrowing money, hunting ginseng, which sold for $30 a pound when you could find that much, plying with a pair of mules, working at the sawmill, and being a weekend barber. He watched Buford outgrow his baby clothes and wondered if he would have to travel the same road. He worried about Buford's strong attachment to his mother. He'd have to outgrow that if he's ever going to get anywhere. Buford Pusser was a quiet, timid boy who stayed close to Helen's side day in and day out. Sometimes when she turned too quickly, she stepped on him. When that happened, she would reprimand him for not playing with the other youngsters in the neighborhood. But Buford didn't understand his mother's viewpoint. He couldn't understand her explanation of why he should go to school either. Helen Pusser was a patient woman, tried to convince Buford that getting an education was important. I want you to have more than I did, she said, but her words had no effect on him. Please, Mommy, I don't want to go to school. 12th of August, chapter 2, page 15. I don't want to go to school. Buford begged over and over, hanging onto his mother's dress. I want to stay home with you. Helen didn't go into the subject again until September 1942, the year Buford was 5. Listen, son, you have to go to school. When you get older, you'll be glad I made you go. Do you hear me? She argued, frowning in desperation. She dipped her hands into a pan of water, patted her son's hair, and combed back the unruly locks. Buford continued to protest. "I don't want to go to school," he sobbed. "I don't want to go to school till I'm 40 years old." Helen turned her head away from her son and laughed silently. She understood his feelings for her and in part blamed herself for letting him become so attached. She had enjoyed his strong affection. The other children were older and growing more independent of her, but Buford was still a baby, and he was the baby in the family, her baby boy. "Buford, you've got to go to school, whether you like it or not. It's the law. They can put your father and me in jail if we don't make you go. Besides, you'll like school once you go and meet the other kids and play games with them. You'll see." Unfortunately, however, things did not turn out as Helen had predicted. Once Buford was finally pushed out of the house and away from the protection of his mother, he found a hostile world among the other children at Finger School because he was shy. He was the object of laughter. The older boys teased him until he wanted to fight back somehow, but he just couldn't do it. And this only made the teasing louder and more frequent. Every morning he went through the same arguments with his mother. He begged her to let him stay home. And when she made him go to school, he cried. Helen didn't tell Carl about the problem for fear that he would take a switch to the boy. Carl almost always lost his temper when he punished the children, and she was afraid he would really lose it now. He had. 12th of August, chapter 2, page 16. Never said much about it, but she felt that he blamed her for Buford's attitude. She tolerated Buford's tantrums for 2 months, but the strain finally became too much, and she made a bargain with him. He could stay out of school until he was 6 years old, and then he would have to go regardless. Helen Pusser kept her part of the bargain. 2 months later, when Buford reached his 6th birthday, she took him to school once again. Since she thought it might be better for him to enter a new school where he wouldn't be haunted by unpleasant memories, she enrolled him in Leapwood School. His new teacher, Mrs. Corey Hare, seemed to have a way with him, and to Helen's surprise, Buford began to adjust. However, his adjustment came too late because he was several weeks behind the other first graders in studies. He was not promoted to the 2nd grade at the end of the school year. The boy was disappointed and resentful, Helen thought. He had tried, and it was going to take all summer to get him over that. During the summer, Buford whiled away the days fishing in a creek on the Pusser farm with a cane pole he had made himself. He usually caught a few sun perch, and for a little while he was able to keep his mind off school. He wished that the summer would never end. Late in August, Buford put aside his fishing pole and helped the family gather the peanut crop. It was the first time he had been asked to help with the chores, and he was proud. Maybe he could do something to help after all. He never forgot his first day in the peanut patch. The sun illuminated the sky with an unreal intensity and splashed heat waves over the red clay. Buford wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and tugged at the peanut vine behind Molly Harris, his grandmother. She pulled a cluster of peanuts from the ground and then spat a stream of snuff into the loose dirt. Buford watched her with mounting inquisitiveness. His grandmother had dipped snuff, and his grandfather, Bliss Harris, had chewed tobacco ever since he could remember. Now in the hot sun, pulling on the peanut plants, sweating as his parents and grandparents had for years, he wanted to try some stuff. "Give me some snuff, Grandma," Buford demanded. His mother had always told him that dipping and chewing were nasty habits. But if Grandma and Grandpa did, he couldn't see that there was anything wrong with either one. "You're too little," she said. "No, I'm not. I'm in 1st grade. I'm big enough." I said, "No, Buford." Carl, pulling peanuts nearby, broke into the conversation. Go on, Molly. Give him some snuff. He's as stubborn as a young jackass. He won't be satisfied until he finds out for himself that he's not near as big as he thinks he is. Helen Pusser objected, but it did no good. Carl took a small can of snuff from Mrs. Harris and pulled out Buford's lip and filled it full of finely ground tobacco. Buford licked some of the snuff into his mouth, then swallowed. He coughed and tried to hawk it, but he couldn't. His eyes filled with tears, and the ground spun like a merry-go-round. He vomited and vomited, and finally passed out. Carl scooped him up in his arms and carried him to the house. Buford had dry heaves for 3 days, and from that day on, tobacco in any form made him sick. That's the end of that section. I had similar experiences with my first dip of snuff, but by the 3rd grade, I began liking snuff, and I dipped most of my life. But I quit in 2018, and I've been pretty good about staying quit since then. But anyway, that being said, let's finish off this little section down here real quick, and we'll be done with this page, and we can move on to page 18. In September, Buford again entered the 1st grade at Leapwood. After a few weeks, he even seemed to enjoy going to school. Even though he was big for 6 years, he still let the other boys push him around. But he was quick to defend a smaller boy who was being, 12th August, chapter 2, page 18, picked on. A school day seldom passed without Buford coming home with cuts and bruises, usually the result of his encounters with school bullies. This infuriated Carl Pusser. Why the hell don't you knock the piss out of those little bastards when they mess with you? His father scolded. Don't let them shove you around. The more you take, the more they'll dish out. Beat their asses once, and they'll leave you alone. Helen whirled from the stove in anger. Carl, that isn't any way to talk to your son. Using all that filthy talk, that's a shame and a disgrace. Oh yeah, Carl snapped. Let him grow up to be a sissy. First thing you know, he'll be squatting to take a piss. Carl stormed out of the house. His stern words had no effect on Buford. However, he continued to let himself be bullied, and his 5 years at Leapwood did little to change that. Now, that's the end of another section. Let's talk a little bit about that. I have personally always thought that Buford and Helen's relationship was just too close and a bit unhealthy. She sheltered him a little too much, and a few other things. It just didn't seem right. Buford's sister Gail used to dress him up in girls' clothes too. So, what's that got to do with anything? I don't know. But I guess it took him a while to toughen up, and it made it harder on him in school. I don't know. But anyway, let's finish this page. In 1948, Mrs. Pusser enrolled Buford in the 6th grade at the Adamsville Elementary School. He rode the school bus to Adamsville, but would not ride the bus to special school functions. Still timid and shy at the age of 11, he was afraid he would get lost if he rode the bus anywhere except to school and back. For the next 2 years, Buford stayed in his mother's shadow, but in 1950, to Carl's delight, he hired out for his first job. Charlie Duran, owner of a general store in Adamsville, hired Buford to mow the lawn, trim the hedges around the house, and plow and plant his garden. Buford took pride in all of the work, but he enjoyed garden chores the most. He made extra effort to lay down straight rows when he was planting, and Duran often told Buford that the rows were the straightest he had ever seen. The more Duran complimented him, the harder Buford worked. Chapter 2, page 19, 12th of August. I don't want to go to school. was something different about working for someone else, he thought. He worked hard at home, but that was expected of him. It was not like a real job. In 1951, Carl Pusser decided it was time to give up trying to support his family from his barely productive farm. He had to find a regular job. John, Buford's older brother, had already dropped out of school and was working. After a few days of job hunting, Carl found employment with a construction cleanup crew in Columbia, Tennessee. Carl's leaving left Buford and Helen with the responsibility of making a crop. But Buford, although only 13 years old, readily accepted the challenge. He spent hours driving the old farmall tractor, plowing the fields and cultivating cotton and corn rows. When he wasn't plowing, hoeing, or thinning cotton, he helped his mother work the truck garden. He gave the vegetables special attention, since the food supply was for another year depended on the garden. By midsummer, however, the lack of rain threatened to destroy all that he had worked for. In the fields, the corn hardened too fast, and the silks turned brown too quickly. The faded green leaves were heavy with dust and stirred lazily in an occasional slight breeze. Tiny green-winged bugs buzzed among the scrawny cotton stalks, and lizards scampered over the parched ground along the dry, hard-packed rows. When the crops had been planted, Buford began to spend most of his time cleaning up around the farm. He raked and burned the dead tree limbs and other debris which had collected during the winter. One July evening, Helen Pusser leaned against the rail fence near the barn, and a smile passed over her worried face as she watched smoke from burning rubbish hover close to the ground. "It's finally going to rain, Buford," she said. "The Lord is going to save our crops." "How do you know, Mom?" All right, we're going to leave it right there. Because if we don't, this video is going to be like an hour long. And with my review and everything of this chapter, I don't want it to be an hour long. So we're just going to stop right there for now. So this is probably a pretty honest account of Buford's childhood. They may have embellished a few things, but it kind of seems okay. I'm pretty confident that the childhood part of this chapter is pretty accurate. It is what it is. But anyway, we'll come back with part 2 of chapter 2, because this chapter is so long, in the next video. I want to thank y'all for watching the Main Man channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. You're watching the Main Man channel. It's not just a name, it's a way of life. You got to improvise, adapt, and overcome each and every day to make it in this cruel old world. Folks, God bless you. Y'all the best people in the world. And I'll catch y'all next time.